I'm like the kid who was reading self-help books even when I was like in middle school and junior high. I was like the dork with my like writing my songs about my feelings and reading about self-help and writing quotes in my journal. But my complaint about the self-help world and a lot of nonfiction right now is there's always a solution, right? The way to stop blah, 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 how to get productive, how to stop worrying, like how to finally get XYZ, right? And I'm sure that has to do with capitalism and the publishers and all of those pieces. But I think like there's not a lot of good answers to the things that are really hard for us. And so I would love to see more people name things and say like, no, we haven't fixed this, or this is an issue that we don't have a good answer for, or yes, you're anxious, that makes sense, and there's not a quick fix for that. Yes, the world feels scary, and we're with you on that. Welcome to Are We Happy Yet?
I'm Hannah Buzzo, licensed therapist.
I'm Jane Thatcher Hahn, licensed clinical social worker. We're not just friends, we're therapists who have been working with our clients on improving their mental health and relationships for years. Coupled with our own life experiences, we found ourselves in a conundrum. As mental health becomes less stigmatized and conversations about healing, self-help, and personal growth have gone mainstream, why are more and more Americans reporting lower life satisfaction and increased mental health issues with each passing year?
The question kept nagging at us. Despite the growing openness around mental health, why are we seeing an increase in anxiety, depression, and isolation?
It's baffling, right? We're all diving into therapy, self-help, psychedelics, meditation, life hacks, you name it. But the sense of connection and well-being seems to be slipping away, no matter what we do.
So Jane and I got curious about the bigger picture, how creativity, politics, technology, work, spirituality, culture, and more impact our well-being. Our goal is to spark open, relatable conversations about these topics. Through unfiltered discussions, a few uncomfortable truths, we'll have lots of laughter and lightheartedness along the way. Join us each week as we dig deep into these questions, share insights, and try to understand what will truly, finally, make us happy.
Let's go.
Jane, this is our first solo since our first episode.
True. I'm so excited.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be super fun. You're a hoot, Hannah.
We're a hoot. We're a hoot.
We are.
So I do appreciate the feedback that say that you and Jane's dynamic is really fun, because I do think that.
Well, I mean, we're having a good time when we're together, genuinely. So
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Some people looking in on it might be like, these people are crazy, but that's fine too.
That is fine too. To each their own, right?
To each their own. Yep. To each their own.
And so for today's solo, this will come out on Election Day in the United States, so November 5th. And you and I just wanted to get on and talk a little bit about how we're seeing culture and politics and world events show up in our offices, how we think mental health is impacted by it, talk about how all of these things that are beyond our control affect us in our day-to-day lives. So we kind of just wanted to get on and riff about that to be timely with Election Day today in the United States.
Yeah. And full transparency, we already recorded like 15 or 20 minutes of this, and I forgot to hit record. And so the really brilliant interview that we did will never be heard by anybody, but you can listen to this one. And if you haven't voted today, please stop whatever you're doing and go out, cast your ballots. I told Hannah in the first attempt at this interview that in our household, we like to wait until the very last day, fill out our ballots, and then drop them off like 5 minutes before the polls close. But however you do it, just get it out there. Yeah.
And I told Jane that feels really on brand.
Yeah. And I was like, accurate. That's very accurate.
Mine is on brand too. I did mine and got it off my list. It's signed, sealed, and delivered. And I wore my sticker all day yesterday watching The Real Housewives. So my dogs are the people I came in contact with yesterday, so I'm sure they will be really inspired and motivated by
I'm
my
sure they would.
civic duty.
Although sometimes I'm like, what if our pets don't have the same political views as us? Like, what if they could talk and then you're like, oh my God, we're not even on the same team.
Okay, so I yesterday was sending my parents, we found these dog costumes and they were like pickleball players and they're
Oh,
really cute.
amazing.
And my dad sent me one back and it was a dog dressed up as Donald Trump. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't like imagine that dog. Like, is that dog happy or is that dog
Yeah.
sad?
Did that dog consent to that outfit?
Right.
They can't really. Our cat Muggins never consents to the mermaid outfits I put her in. Poor
She
thing.
was just in one.
I know, it was so cute. Little wings and mermaid sparkles.
Aw.
Yeah, she's upset about it. Anyways, Hannah, tell us, like, what are you seeing in your office this year? People
Yeah.
coming in talking about politics, the environment, the Middle East. What are you seeing? What are you noticing?
Okay. Two things I've noticed. One, and I'm curious because I actually don't think I've asked you about this
Mm,
ever, but this year feels like the first year since 2020 where things are slowed down. There aren't as many people
mm,
reaching out.
mm.
Um, it seems like, I mean, it was just bonkers busy 2020, 2021,
Yeah.
2022, 2023. Like everyone, I mean, so many referrals, wait lists, like we couldn't get
Mm,
people in.
mm-hmm.
And I know that was pretty common. So this is the first year that it's felt slowed down. And that brings me to my second point, which that surprised me because the last election, and not that people were just coming for the election, 2020 is also COVID. So there was a
Mm,
lot going on in the world. But I was expecting way more people, one, talking about the election in
mm.
sessions, and two, starting services. And I
Yeah.
haven't seen either of that, which I'm really surprised about.
Mm-hmm. I I feel very surprised by that too. We are seeing actually this is interesting and I don't know, this might be purely anecdotal and just our practice, but what we're seeing right now is a crazy amount of couples looking for services.
Yep, ditto.
Really? And I think
Yep.
that's interesting. Like everybody was maybe just trying to keep their shit together 2020,
Mm-hmm.
2021, 22. So we're just seeing a lot of people who are either at the breaking point with their marriage or
Mm-hmm.
they're like, we don't know where to go from here. So we're seeing a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that. And me personally with my individual clients, I'm just not hearing them talk about the politics in the same, it's not new or fresh in the way that it felt
Yeah.
um, around 2020, like you're talking about. So that election time, um, I think there was still, I mean, there's still a lot of fear. There's still a lot of anger. There's still a lot of, everybody thinks the other side is batshit crazy, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a numbness to it, or maybe there's I think maybe we've grown accustomed to the way that politics have been working in this country, even though we all feel outraged in our own way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be akin to getting used to an abusive relationship or a bad
Mm-hmm.
work environment or high levels of anxiety, where if you live with something for a very long time, you find ways to adapt to that, whether those are healthy ways of adapting or not. I think a lot of times when
Mm-hmm.
we're under a stressful political system or a stressful environmental or cultural um, experience, we do find ways to adapt. We're wired for
Mm-hmm.
that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So numbing out or disconnecting or giving up or getting angrier, getting louder. I don't know. What do you think your clients, your family and friends are doing to adapt right now?
I think people are numb. I think,
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right. And I think people are tired, and
Mm-hmm.
whether what side you're on, like tired of not feeling heard,
Mm-hmm.
tired of feeling othered, tired of feeling like combative and
Yeah.
angry. I think you're right there. And I think too, people, and this is what I've seen in my practice, people have so much going on in their lives. And I personally believe that politics do influence our individual lives, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
not of the mind politics don't affect
Mm-hmm.
us.
Mm-hmm.
So some people may disagree with this, but I think folks are struggling to pay the bills and get groceries on the table and get their kids off to school and get through the day. Like, I think
Yeah.
I'm seeing, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's more clear. I don't know, but I'm
Mm.
seeing more folks in survival mode. And what I know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Mm.
right? That
Mm-hmm.
triangle,
Mm-hmm.
if you're in survival mode, none of the other things like
Yeah.
community, politics, self-actualization matter. I'm seeing more and more people in
Mm.
survival mode than ever. And I think that's part of it too. It's like the blinders are on. We have to deal with what's right in front of us, which is I can't afford
Mm-hmm.
my mortgage, groceries are so expensive, whatever the thing is.
Yeah, and it feels striking and even a little scary to me about that is that when we are in survival mode, our brains get very black and white. And if you want to learn a lot
Mm-hmm.
about this, you can go back and listen to Erica Bonham's interview that we
Mm-hmm.
did earlier in the year. But she talked a lot about how survival mode necessarily, the way our brains are wired, the way our systems are structured, we need to think very clearly, very quickly, very black,
Mm-hmm.
white, this, that, um, run, stay, fight. And now I think we're actually seeing that mindset translate into politics and translate into people, how people identify. I'm on this side, I'm on that side. And if I'm on
Mm-hmm.
this side, I'm in it 1,000%, no matter what you tell me. I'm not going to integrate
Mm-hmm.
any other new
Yeah.
facts or details. I'm going to believe what
Yeah.
I believe. Nothing else can change my mind because I'm in survival mode and I need it.
Yeah.
And I don't feel safe, or I feel afraid, or I don't feel heard, or I can't get along with people. So I think, her take was trauma is really what's creating this huge divide in this country.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what I'm seeing and conversations I'm having with clients and friends and family, and I think this is driving the divide, is most people, I would say, like, don't trust the government and don't believe
Mm,
the government, like, really helps them, and that politicians
mm-hmm,
don't care for them, and like they have to take
mm-hmm.
care of themselves. And I think that could put you on either side, left or right.
Yeah.
But what I know about humans is we love to and need to be seen. And so if we're in
Mm,
a culture where we constantly feel unseen, othered,
mm, mm-hmm,
not cared about, in fear of,
mm-hmm,
that drives some like pretty profound psychological, like you're saying,
mm,
thought patterns, but
mm-hmm.
also behavioral things, relational things. I think it impacts us.
What I love about that is is helping us understand. I think we want politics to be a separate sort of intellectual practice, or
Mm-hmm.
we want, and I think this is becoming less and less true, but for a long time it was like, don't talk politics, don't talk religion, or we could separate ourselves from politics, but aren't we aren't separate from it just because it affects our lives. I'm with you that it affects our lives, it affects our well-being, it affects how our money works and what resources we have access to and all of those things. But it
Mm-hmm.
also deeply affects our emotions and our
Mm-hmm.
behaviors. So I think most of us would say, yeah, I'm totally voting rationally, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that's true. I think a lot of us are
Mm-hmm.
voting with big emotions, and sometimes that's
Mm-hmm.
appropriate, and sometimes it's appropriate to step back and say, like, how do I look at the big picture? What's good for humanity? What's
Mm-hmm.
good for the planet? What's good for like the longevity of our
Mm-hmm.
species?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that can be hard to do if you're in this moment,
Mm-hmm.
this very day, trying to
Mm-hmm.
survive.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
There's so much shit out of our control too, that I think like that's part of this conversation. And I think that's also part of the ongoing conversation that we're having
Mm-hmm.
on the podcast around like loneliness and anxiety and
Mm.
depression, is so much is out of our control, so
Mm-hmm.
much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as beings that are literally like wired to feel safe and
Mm-hmm.
avoid discomfort, how
Mm-hmm.
out of control like goes against that need, right? Like those are really
Yes.
like
Yeah.
two competing
Competing.
fundamental things.
Mm-hmm. And I think that over time and through evolution, what we have evolved into is scan for problems, scan for
Mm-hmm.
safety concerns,
Mm-hmm.
do what you can to affect change and make yourself safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we really, truly are in. There's just so many people on the planet. There's just so many countries and people and competing needs and interests and things flying around. I think that to your point, there's so much we have so little control over,
Uh-huh.
and that's a really tough experience for humans. And I think particularly Americans, because Americans, we have a heritage of individualism, and we tell culturally our belief system is you can essentially do whatever you want. You can be king of the mountain. You can have what you want if you work hard enough. We've got like a Protestant work ethic thing going
Mm-hmm.
on, and we've just got a story around how much an individual can affect change
Mm-hmm.
over other people in their environment. And so when you bring that to politics, then you might say, oh, well, I can save the environment, or I can get my politician elected, or I can change this policy. But then we start to realize like, I've just got one vote and I've just got one life to try and
Mm-hmm.
make change and try and move things in one direction. I don't think Americans are very good at accepting you actually can't change that. They don't
100%.
like it. I don't like it, right? I don't like it when
Yeah.
you say to me, like, you can't fix these huge problems that feel like they're threatening our very existence. Well, that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
sit very well in my system. That's pretty terrifying. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm curious how you work with your clients, Hannah, around what you have control over and what you don't, and how to like, are you telling your clients to disconnect from what they don't have control over, or
Mm-hmm.
what do you think is helpful for them?
Well, I think like what is so wonderful and fascinating about our job is also the hardest. And that's,
Mm,
I literally think that our sole job, not sole job, but a big part of our job, something that I see in almost every single session, every single time I sit down with a
mm,
client is there is inherently existential fear and anxiety that we are trying to control, either by
mm,
controlling our bodies, controlling our money and bank account,
mm,
controlling our husband,
mhm,
controlling like whatever, right? I could really say that it comes down to a lot of us are scared,
yeah.
and we're scared because we're human,
Mm,
and that we're trying to manage that fear by controlling, and that
mm,
if we actually deal with the existential fear rather than the
mm,
issue, like that is the healing.
mhm,
And so your question is, how do I deal with clients? Well, I try to help them see how they are focusing kind of on the wrong thing, right? Like
yeah.
you focusing on your husband needing a new job is really about your own fears and
Yeah.
anxieties and disappointment, and you're focusing on being a certain weight is your way of dealing with the fear of not being loved. I'm really dumbing it
Mhm,
down here, but I really think it's like starting to see, okay, I am trying to manage my fear that is inherent to me because I'm a human being by
yeah.
doing this thing. And it's just, I think, like shifting the attention to like what is
Mm,
really going on, you
mhm,
know? Does
mhm.
that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think you're right that there's so much misplaced obsessive anxious thinking,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so really getting people to sit with, I'm mortal, that means I'm going to die. The
Yeah.
people around me are going to die. Illness is
Mm-hmm.
inevitable. Um, Dealing with some of those pieces, definitely the worthiness. Am I loved? Am I not loved? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm spending so much time with clients and my own journey, just working with that. Like, You're good. You don't have to earn your way here.
Why do we all have that?
Ugh, what's going on? I mean,
I've been thinking about that a lot. I'm like, why do we all, like, at the end of the day feel like unlovable? Like, what the fuck?
I know. I mean, it's got to be a million things, right? It's your parents, how they were raised. I personally think a lot of it comes from religion. I think the culture. I think the economic structure that you're in. I think being in a disenfranchised group or a minority group can affect that. I think certainly your trauma history affects that. We know that many traumas create feelings of unworthiness and self-hatred even. But I'm not going to pretend to know the answer for sure because it's just so widespread. I mean, do you feel like you know somebody who's just totally like on board and thinks they're great all the time and doesn't have any self-loathing? I think I know a few people like that.
Yeah, me too. Hi, Dad. I also think it was part of that generation, though, like you're saying, right? Like, I don't know, like self-reflection and looking at our flaws and being vulnerable and like, I don't know, I'm starting to understand how it's a newer thing, like culturally, like they didn't really do that, like in our parents' generation.
And you know, the whole like self-esteem revolution of the 70s and 80s, and like there was a time when people started saying, oh, we should start thinking about how we think about ourselves. But that is definitely a newer push, and it's definitely a newer push within the world of psychology. I mean, the roots of psychology are not in, you know, your Freudian therapists weren't thinking about it the same way that you and I are thinking about it, you know, and our contemporaries. And I would like to understand more, and maybe you and I can do some digging in around culturally, what are the levels of self-acceptance, feelings of self-worth, how do those shift culturally, how do those shift in socioeconomic groups, how do they shift in religious groups, certain belief systems, you know, because there's a lot of pressures coming down on a person. And we'd like to say like we're in control of how we feel about ourselves, and ultimately there's lots we can do to heal our relationships with ourselves, but we inherited a set of beliefs about who we are, and unraveling those is a big piece of the work. It's a big piece of the work I do with my clients anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And then like, okay, so you do that, right? And then my mind goes to how that disrupts like the system that you're in. So like, okay, for instance, like you're so scared of using your voice. I'm way boiling this down. But then like you finally use your voice and you're probably going to get great feedback for that, but you're probably going to get challenging feedback too because you've disrupted the system. That's not good or bad. That's just when something moves, something else has to, right? And so then you're dealing with all of that, right? It's I think too, a lot of the work that I do with clients is like, you are going to have to deal with short-term pain, disruption, and discomfort to get you to where you want to go, right?
100%. I mean, I think systems want to be in equilibrium. And when you and I are using the term systems, I'm thinking family systems, even your relationship with your partner, your friendships, your relationships at work. These are all systems that, you know, I play this role, you play this role, you play this role, you play this role. It kind of likes to settle. And when you do your work and start to work through some of your self-esteem stuff, some of your trauma, some of your anxiety, some of your attachment issues, you do become something different. And I've very recently had conversations with clients about how do I show up in relationships now that I feel a little different. People don't like people don't like now that I found my voice. People are confused or the system is upset. So I love this. I love what you said, you know, it's like there is temporary discomfort. Things change. And I often tell the clinicians that I supervise, you actually are the disruptor. Your job is to disrupt patterns that aren't working. Your job is to dismantle systems that are painful or oppressive or creating mental health issues. People don't like that, you know? People often don't like your boundaries. They don't like it when you become more outspoken. They don't like it when you become happier and healthier. They don't like it when they can't manipulate you in the same way anymore. So I'd love to say, like, come to therapy and feel better right away. And it's just all uphill from here. And that's, you know, not quite how it goes. But it can be done, and it's worth it. Mm-hmm.
It's worth it. And we can get much more into this on our therapy episode that we're planning. But I think that's like what is different about therapy is like, yes, you pay us, and yes, you're not in our life, or we're not in your life. But also like, hopefully, ideally, you're developing a healthy, secure attachment with your therapist. And so you're having an experience of disrupting, but also having someone still care for you and be in connection with you and look at you non-judgmentally. Like, I don't think it's all in the head. I think it's something in our body too, of like going to someone who you respect and care about, who cares about you and fully sees you and isn't rejecting you. Like, I think that corrects something for us.
Absolutely. And I think when I understand that people have the hang up, like, why do I have to pay somebody to help me? Or why do I have to pay somebody to be my friend? But I'm telling you, you don't want your friends to be, they're not neutral enough to help you create the kind of disruption that you need for your life. And you want a person who's totally neutral and needs nothing from you, except for either your insurance to pay them or for you to pay them, you know. And I'm not saying the therapists don't get a lot of joy out of their work and get a lot of fulfillment, because they do. But, you know, their job is literally to show up and not need you to fulfill any emotional, social, spiritual needs for them, so that they can be completely objective and help you look at your systems and say, here's how I could be showing up differently in a way that best serves me, you know? I want to go back to something you said that I really appreciated. So you're saying people are focusing on the wrong things, right? I'm trying to change my husband. I'm trying to change my weight. I'm trying to change my bank account. But it's really like the anxiety or the existential dread or all of these pieces. So could we talk about the people who are like, yes, I want to focus on the right things, but I also want to be a social activist, or I also believe that I really want to take care of the environment. Like, how do we stay sane if we're like, all right, I'm going to focus on the right things, but I'm also going to go out into the world and try and help? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, it's something that I think about a lot. And I think, I don't know, I think like we have to set limits for ourselves and be realistic with ourselves, right? Like, I don't know. I think it's like, what is the realistic piece? Is it realistic that I myself, Hannah Buzzo, is going to solve climate change? Probably not, right? But like, what we can do is we can do this podcast, and I think like get more information out there. I think we can donate $5 like we are. Like, it's like, what is a little bit above my comfort zone? Like, if I'm just going through life, I'm not donating, I'm not having these conversations that can be edgy, that feel vulnerable. What is above my comfort zone, but also like being realistic that there ain't much I can really do, you know? So not to be a nihilist, but also not to like be complacent. I think it's like, what is the one step above my comfort zone, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's the line that people are struggling with, is how do I not be nihilistic and saying like, I can't really change this, but how do I then not have actions that, like, how do I not then just give up and not try it all? Right? Because we could all do that. We could all be like, I can't make any changes, so, you know, whatever, let it all burn down, which it might be anyways, and we're just in it and we can't see it, but who knows? I think that's almost at odds, right? I can't do anything, but I should still do something. But if
and I think like that's what we have to sit with, is like, I'm not powerless, but I'm also not like powerful. So it's like, what versus like what we will do instead of sitting with that, which is an uncomfortable thing. It's like
Mm.
bringing up existential shit. That's what I'm saying. It brings up like, how much do I matter? Like,
Yeah.
will I leave a legacy? Do I
Mm.
mean something? Am I
Mm-hmm.
important? Like, it brings up these human questions
Mm-hmm.
that I think we have to sit with instead of focusing
Mm-hmm.
on like, God, society sucks so bad, and oh my God, let me like
Mm-hmm.
go, I don't know, like streak naked through the Capitol. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, right? But that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying is like, this is bringing up real human shit of like, do I matter?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to sit with that versus like focus on the other piece.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing is that we haven't yet tried streaking naked through the Capitol, so we
I
can't rule
mean,
that
we
out.
would.
We would if we thought it would change anything, but your point is, and you're very good at reminding us all about this. Like, you have to sit with discomfort. Things are not fine. Things are not fine in the world, in the political system, in the environment, probably in your own personal system, and learning to sit with that and accept that and acknowledge it without giving up, without running in the other direction. That takes a lot of courage, I think.
And I think all the shit that we're seeing in culture is like adaptations to that. I think because
Yeah.
the question is really we're asking is, do I matter? I think that's
Yeah.
the people who are on Twitter and like scathing people. I think that's the people
Mm-hmm.
who are shooting Donald Trump. I think that's the
Mm.
people who are, um, like going on and like risking their lives going to the Capitol. And I think those are the
Mm.
people. Like,
Yeah.
I think that is the adaptation, and I'm talking in extremes, but I
Mm.
think those are people trying to get a human need met. Do I
Mm-hmm.
matter? And
Mm-hmm.
so instead of doing that, they're going to the Capitol, they're storming the Capitol, they're lighting themselves on fire, they
Mm.
are shooting Donald Trump, like,
Yeah.
right? Like, that is like the response in an extreme
Mm-hmm.
way to
Mm-hmm.
a human that like really wants to know if they matter or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And can't sit with the possibility that maybe they're just a speck of dust. And I don't have the answer about
Right.
whether or not whatever any of it all means, but um, there's definitely differing levels of tolerance of people being able to sit with that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I know we sound very therapy right now because we're like, just sit with it. But there's a reason that we always are saying that to people.
Yeah, there is a
Mm-hmm.
reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, that's the only, and not that I'm saying, here I go doing it, like, oh, I'm all self-important, and I don't think I've at all have done this in an amazing way, but I will say that is when I started to actually feel different and feel my
Mm-hmm.
life start to shift, like actually is starting to actually deal with the root of it. Like, okay, I'm
Mm-hmm.
feeling like I don't matter. I'm feeling scared if
Mm-hmm.
my partner loves me. I'm feeling
Mm-hmm.
incompetent. Like,
Yeah.
these are real things that I think we have to deal with. When I started getting to the root of it versus getting all this reactive shit, that is when my life
Mm-hmm.
started to actually change, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think as we say this all, we can still even acknowledge that um, if certain people get into office, it will affect certain people negatively. I truly believe that. Like on a big level, so there's this conversation, your individual work with yourself, and then I think there's a bigger picture, like, yes, and there's some serious consequences that could come from different people getting into office or from climate change, or I mean there's already climate disasters, right? So I think that's another, like, yes, and right, like, all I can do is this moment with me sitting with this and accepting that there's people who, including myself at some point, who can and are going to be affected by these things.
Hell yeah. And I mean, I am liberal and I voted for Kamala Harris.
What?
And I will also, yeah, did you know that?
Oh my God, I really just learning something new about you every day.
But I also like, the thing too that I think feels different this time around is like I can kind of have empathy for the folks that are voting for Trump. Not all of them, but
Mm,
like they're scared too. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
scared, like they're not able to afford their life. They're scared that people
Yeah.
are going to take their jobs. They're scared that they're not going to matter and their Christian
Mm-hmm.
views aren't going to matter. And do I think like they're going about it in a dangerous way? Yes, and I agree
Mm-hmm.
with you. And I hope to God this episode comes out and Donald Trump is not reelected. I pray and
Yeah.
pray. I'll be transparent about that. And like I can understand like why he is appealing to 50% of the culture. I really can.
Well, and you also just have to think about the numbers. Like, are we going to then say that 50% of everybody is an asshole? Like, that doesn't really
Well,
add up in my brain.
yeah.
Math is not my strength, but math, I can do 50%, right? Like, I feel like
Yeah.
that. Do I then
Right.
just want to hate 50? Like, I have to
50%
understand.
of people are inherently bad is like what you're saying,
Yes.
right? Like
Yes.
that like just doesn't
Yes.
make sense for us.
Right. I don't believe, I just can't believe, like, I just don't, that doesn't
I can't
register
either.
for my worldview. And so I am also like a diehard liberal and am pretty terrified that Trump would win, but also, yeah, I don't want to be blind to the reason why people are attracted to what he's saying. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
be blind to like either the traumas or the misinformation or the
Mm-hmm.
fearfulness or whatever the reasons may be that they are invested in that person, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sorry to your dad.
I know. Sorry, Dad.
Yeah,
He already
sorry to.
knows.
Okay, good.
That's why he
I
wanted
still
me to
really
dress
liked
my.
him.
That's why he wanted me to dress up the dog like Donald Trump.
Yeah, yeah.
But I get where he's coming from. And at the end of the day, one thing that feels different that like me and my family weren't able to do in 2020 was like have a civil conversation about it.
Mm,
Right.
mm-hmm,
And so, I mean, that feels like a shift, at least for me. And,
mm-hmm,
you know, I'm with you, Jane. I like can't sleep at night thinking 50% of people are assholes and bad and like
mm-hmm.
are, you know, insert all the words. But
Yeah.
that's why I also just like have to trust that like what is for the greater good will prevail. Like, you know what I mean? I really, at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, do believe that.
Yeah. I have no idea.
Who do you think's gonna win?
I have no idea about that either. Yeah. I feel like I don't know what the fuck's going on, so I'm just gonna stick with that because, and I think that part of the problem is that people want to be able to say, like, I know what's
I
happening and
know.
I know where it's going and we can figure it out and
Yeah.
humanity is going to be fine. And I just don't
Yeah,
know.
for
I don't
sure.
know that. I don't know that. And
For sure.
so I think that me trying to find ways to convince myself is maybe going to lead me to a disconnection from reality and a disconnection from
Reality.
myself and a disconnection from the people who are suffering a lot more than I'm having to
Yeah.
suffer at this moment in time. You know,
A
so I'm
hundred
just trying to be
percent.
like, I don't know what the fuck's going on. You know, I'm trying to let that be a little bit more prevailing in my life and be like, oh, this is a really complicated, messy, chaotic,
Mm,
dangerous, scary world. And I grew up in the suburbs in the 80s as a
yeah.
white middle class person. So I didn't know that
Yeah.
until recently. You know, I didn't
Yeah.
know how scary and threatening and dangerous the world was. So I also want to just claim my privilege around like there's lots of people who grew up in really unstable environments um,
Yeah.
who are more aware of how violent people can be and how
Mm-hmm.
disastrous climate change can be. And then now I live in Denver where like I'm having a beautiful fall and it's just a little warmer than normal and my house is still standing and because there's no tornadoes
Mm-hmm.
here, you know, so I want to try and
Mm-hmm.
claim those pieces too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
think
you're
what,
right. It's like we feel scared of the world, and there are people, less privileged people, who have been scared of the world since the moment that we are born.
mhm, yeah, because when I'm driving in my car, that's a different experience than when a black person drives in their car in
Yeah.
America and
Yeah.
is stopped by the police or is trailed by the police, right? That
Yeah.
my body's, you know, my experience in my body is different. So I think
Yeah.
when we're rushing to conclusions or trying to feel safe all the time, we can disregard other people's experience in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm, you know, just in my own process of trying not to do that and trying to get away from it. I would say okay, like I'm like the kid who was reading self-help books even when I was like in middle school and junior high. I was like the dork with my like writing my songs about my feelings and reading about self-help and writing quotes in my journal. But my complaint about the self-help world and a lot of nonfiction right now is there's always a solution, right? The way to stop blah, 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 how to get productive, how to stop worrying, like how to finally get XYZ, right? And I'm sure that has to do with capitalism and the publishers and all of those pieces. But I think like there's not a lot of good answers to the things that are really hard for us. And so I would love to see more people name things and say like, no, we haven't fixed this, or this is an issue that we don't have a good answer for, or yes, you're anxious. That makes sense. And there's not a quick fix for that. Yes, the world feels scary and we're with you. We're with you on that, you know?
I'm glad you said that. That's something I've thought a lot about, like with the podcast is there's been a part of me that's like, are we fear mongering? Like, are we just creating fear? But like, you know, I mean, what you're saying is actually like really resonating right now. It's being real and saying things and making them the truth and like practicing what we preach and dealing with discomfort, like, and not giving people a solution, just opening up these conversations with people about things that are going on and like inviting people to reflect on that. I mean, I think what you just said there kind of sums up this podcast as a whole.
Yeah, and I think that the danger with always having a solution is then we just keep reworking the same systems and saying like, there's a solution in the system that we have, or there's a solution that you personally as an individual can find. There's a fix to all this. And I think that some people are starting to say like, no, there's not. That's not how it works, you know?
Right. Well, and I think it goes against even like my personal worldview, which is like, no matter how much solutions, like there is still inherent pain because we're human fucking beings. So it's like this self-help solution. It's like denying our humanness. You know, at the end of the day.
That we've got to be in like the mix of the pain and the beauty and the terror and the violence and the connection and the success and the sacrifice. That's a more whole, true, realistic expectation of life, you know?
Well, now that I'm wildly uncomfortable.
Now we now we can go out into the world with these feelings of these unsettled feelings, right? Any last thoughts for people on Election Day, Hannah?
Vote, and if you feel overwhelmed, turn off the news and the Twitter and the phone and go for a walk and breathe and look at the trees and pet an animal. Like, what do you think?
I think that it's, you know what, it's already done by the time this podcast comes out. It's going to be done. So just make sure you remind yourself that there was nothing that you could have done differently to change the outcome, unless, I don't know, unless you're some like dickwad that's stealing votes or registering dead people, then, you know, like,
then maybe there is something you could have done.
There is something you could have done, and I want you to feel bad about it. But otherwise, this is the moment of time that you're in. And I think take care of yourself if you can.
And we're all in it together, you know? That's what I feel. Like, fuck it. Like,
fuck it. Awesome. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Are We Happy Yet? A podcast brought to you by Green Roof Studios. This episode was produced, recorded, and edited by Jane Thatcher Hahn and Hannah Buzzo. All original music was written and recorded by the Jane Thatcher Band. For more information about the show or to get in touch with us, please visit our website at www.arewehappyyetpodcast.com. Thanks for joining. See you next time.